What if everything you believed about the Iran-Israel conflict was merely the tip of a far deeper, ancient, and eerily precise mystery? What if I revealed that the script for this war might have been penned millennia ago in biblical texts? Could an ancient religious document hold the key to deciphering why missiles streak across Middle Eastern skies today? The reality is far more gripping and unsettling than you might ever have considered. Welcome to Myths Unearthed, where timeless tales, buried terrors, and divine battles are brought to life. If you're fascinated by the hidden layers of mythology, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with every epic tale. Music. Recently, the world stood stunned as a colossal wave of missiles illuminated the night above Israel. The aggressor, Iran, a nation long regarded with distrust, now openly escalating to direct confrontation. To some, this seemed like just another episode in a persistent regional struggle. But for those versed in biblical prophecy, it signaled something far darker, something predestined. This abrupt escalation wasn't spontaneous. It was a counterstrike, a reaction to a string of meticulously calculated attacks by Israel, which went beyond mere self-defense. Tensions ignited in October when Hamas, closely aligned with Iran, unleashed an unexpected assault on Israel. This wasn't merely symbolic, it was tactical. The attack drew Israel into a fierce cycle of reprisals, targeting not only hostile fighters but striking at the core of Iran's regional influence. Israel's strikes were deliberate, hitting intelligence hubs, nuclear facilities, and military command centers deep within Iran's borders. What distinguished these strikes was their unprecedented level of penetration. According to the Jerusalem Post, Israel's Mossad infiltrated Iran's heavily fortified intelligence networks, eliminating key Revolutionary Guard leaders and even nuclear experts. Jerusalem Post, 2025. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a psychological blow. The strikes rattled Iran's leadership, exposing vulnerabilities in its national security framework. Within Iran, the aura of unassailability that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei had cultivated for years began to crumble. Confronted with domestic unrest and international embarrassment, the regime faced a critical juncture. In what seemed more an act of desperation than strength, Iran unleashed one of its largest ever missile barrages. Yet, as the skies blazed, most missiles were neutralized by Israel's Iron Dome or landed harmlessly in unpopulated areas. Militarily, the impact was minimal, some civilian injuries, 3 lives tragically lost, but strategically, the assault faltered. Israel's counter-response, however, was devastating. Its counteroffensive erased significant portions of Iran's mid- and long-range missile defenses, obliterated parts of its nuclear program, and sent a message to Tehran and the world: we are watching and we are capable. But here's where it gets truly chilling. This wasn't just a clash of modern geopolitics. For those who read the Bible not only as a spiritual guide, but as a prophetic document, the patterns emerging are startling. In the book of Numbers 23:24, a verse often overlooked suddenly resurfaces with chilling clarity. The people rise like a lioness. They rouse themselves like a lion that does not rest until it devours its prey and drinks the blood of its victims. This wasn't metaphor. This was the name Israel chose for its latest military operation, the Rising Lion. An invocation of ancient prophecy aimed squarely at modern enemies. Biblical symbolism aside, the truth is that Iran is no longer what it once was. Once a powerful empire known as Persia, one that historically had strong ties with the Jewish people, It has become a fractured state both politically and spiritually. And yes, believe it or not, there was a time when Iran and Israel weren't enemies at all. In fact, during the early 20th century, Persia was one of the few Middle Eastern nations that maintained diplomatic and economic ties with the newly formed State of Israel. The two countries traded oil, technology, and even collaborated on missile development during the 1960s and 70s. As absurd as it sounds today, the Islamic Republic once had Israeli engineers working side by side with their own military experts. But everything changed in 1979. That year, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah and replaced his Western-aligned regime with theocratic rule under Ayatollah Khomeini. Israel was declared an enemy of Islam. The embassy in Tehran was shut down, and any trace of diplomacy was buried beneath revolutionary slogans and militant ideology. What followed was 4 decades of shadow wars, espionage, proxy conflicts, and strategic assassinations, each more covert than the last. Why does Iran hate Israel so deeply? The answer is not rooted in religion alone, nor in territory, but in power, spiritual, regional, and symbolic. For the Iranian regime, Israel represents not just a political adversary, but a prophetic threat. A nation that claims a divine purpose and one that stands resilient in the face of overwhelming opposition undermines Tehran's narrative of Islamic dominance. Now, with its nuclear ambitions crippled and its regional proxies weakened, Iran finds itself cornered. The economic pressure is suffocating. Inflation spirals, unemployment rises, and worse, faith in the regime crumbles from within. Protests erupt, dissidents multiply. Khamenei's grasp on power slips inch by inch. So what now? Can Iran afford to retreat and lose face? Or will it gamble everything on a final apocalyptic confrontation? We end this chapter with a haunting passage from Ezekiel 38 verses 5 to 6, Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets, also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. This ancient coalition, led by none other than Persia, was prophesied to rise against Israel in the final days. And if what we're seeing today is the spark, then what comes next may be the firestorm. Before enmity, there was alliance, and it was a strong one. In the years following the foundation of Israel in 1948, the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East was radically different. While most Arab nations refused to recognize Israel's existence and actively engaged in conflict against it, one Muslim-majority country quietly extended a hand. That country was Iran. Under the rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, Iran not only recognized Israel informally, but actively traded with it, especially in oil, making Iran Israel's primary supplier during a time of regional isolation. This cooperation expanded beyond mere economics. Iran allowed Israeli intelligence agencies to operate discreetly on its soil, and there are strong records confirming military cooperation, including missile development projects and joint arms deals. It was a pragmatic partnership born out of shared interests and mutual enemies, particularly Arab nationalism and Soviet influence, both of which threatened their regional agendas. The relationship began to deteriorate in the final years of the Shah's reign. But the true breaking point came in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution erupted. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, returning from exile, overthrew the Shah's regime and instituted a theocratic government based on strict Shiite Islamic principles. With that, Iran's diplomatic position underwent a seismic transformation. Israel was no longer a silent partner. It became the embodiment of evil, a symbol of Western imperialism and a theological. But even during these transactions, Iran's public posture toward Israel remained aggressively hostile. The deals were secret for a reason. The hatred was no longer just political. It had become a defining element of the Islamic Republic's identity. Iranian leaders, especially those from the Revolutionary Guard and clerical elite, viewed Israel not merely as an enemy, but as a necessary enemy, one that unified factions within Iran's complex political system. As the decades progressed, this enmity evolved into something far more lethal, a campaign of indirect warfare. Iran didn't attack Israel through conventional means. Instead, it empowered a web of regional militias, each acting as a proxy to carry out Iran's will. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and later Hamas in Gaza were armed, funded, and trained with Iranian support. These proxies served two purposes: to destabilize Israel's borders and to project Iranian influence across the Arab world. Hezbollah's rise, particularly following the 1982 Lebanon War, marked a new chapter in this strategy. Through this organization, Iran gained a foothold on Israel's northern frontier, creating a permanent security threat. This was not war in the traditional sense. It was a war in the shadows. Bombings, assassinations, cyberattacks, and disinformation campaigns filled the space between official declarations, allowing both countries to avoid direct confrontation while escalating tensions year after year. In recent times, however, the lines separating shadow warfare and open conflict have begun to blur. Israel has adopted a more aggressive strategy aimed at preemptively neutralizing Iran's nuclear ambitions. The heart of this tension lies in the question of uranium enrichment. Iran insists its nuclear program is purely civilian, aimed at energy production and medical research. But international inspections and intelligence reports suggest otherwise. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran has enriched uranium up to 60%, just below the threshold required for weapons-grade material. This raises alarms not only in Israel but across the West. Israel's leadership, particularly under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has made it clear that a nuclear-armed Iran is a red line. And to prevent it, Israel has acted, often without warning and without admission. These actions include targeted killings of Iranian nuclear scientists, most notably Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in 2020. He was considered the father of Iran's nuclear program, and his assassination was a clear message. Israel has also conducted cyber operations, such as the infamous Stuxnet virus, which temporarily crippled Iran's centrifuges at the Natanz nuclear facility. These attacks, while never officially claimed, carry the signature of Israeli intelligence. The Islamic Republic's response, in turn, has been limited to proxy retaliation, rocket attacks from Hezbollah, drone incursions, and strikes on Israeli diplomats abroad. The two nations remain locked in a deadly chess match where every move is a signal, every counter a provocation. Yet still, the full-scale war remained avoided until now. The situation escalated dramatically in June of this year. Israel launched its largest strike in history against Iranian infrastructure, targeting the Natanz facility once more. Simultaneously, high-ranking members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard and leading nuclear scientists were killed in coordinated operations. This wasn't just a warning. It was a dismantling of Iran's future military and scientific leadership. Tehran responded with a volley of ballistic missiles, the most extensive attack the regime has ever authorized against Israel. But the missiles failed to achieve any significant damage. Most were intercepted. The few that landed caused minimal casualties. Symbolically, however, the attack marked a turning point. Iran was no longer operating from the shadows. This bold yet ineffective retaliation revealed more than military weakness. It exposed Iran's vulnerability. Years of economic sanctions have ravaged the country's economy. Inflation soars, basic goods are scarce, and unemployment spreads like disease. The Iranian people, worn down by decades of authoritarian rule and worsening living conditions, have grown restless. Protests are violently suppressed. But the discontent simmers beneath the surface. In this fragile state, the regime needs enemies, visible ones. Israel serves that purpose perfectly. Rallying the population around the idea of resisting Zionist oppression distracts from the real struggles within Iran. Yet even propaganda has its limits. Each failed strike, each fallen commander, each shattered lab weakens the illusion of control. And as Tehran grows more isolated, voices from the religious sector rise again, pointing toward ancient prophecies. Many clerics, both in Iran and abroad, believe that the confrontation with Israel is not only inevitable, but divinely orchestrated. A war not for territory, but for the soul of the region. That narrative resonates across both sides. In Israel too, the biblical echoes are unmistakable. The language of prophecy is no longer confined to the pulpit. It is now found in military briefings, operation names, and national rhetoric. The lines between faith, politics, and war have dissolved. In this war of ideology and existence, one passage now circulates more frequently than ever, cited not in sermons, but in intelligence reports, press conferences, and memorial speeches, and in that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured. Zechariah 12 verse 3. Music. The current confrontation between Iran and Israel has stripped away any illusions of detachment. What once unfolded discreetly in intelligence circles and diplomatic back channels has now erupted in full view of the world. For the first time in modern history, the two nations have engaged not only through their proxies or cyber tactics, but in direct, full-scale attacks. On the night of a fateful Friday in mid-June, Israeli jets crossed into hostile skies, executing a highly coordinated assault on Iran's Natanz nuclear facility. The mission, according to the Israeli Defense Forces, was prompted by intelligence indicating that Iran was dangerously close to producing weapons-grade uranium. Within hours, Iran responded, not through its usual channels, but with an open and massive launch of ballistic missiles. This was no longer a covert war. The veil had been lifted, and both nations were now locked in an unprecedented visible escalation. The damage from the Israeli offensive was staggering. Critical infrastructure tied to Iran's nuclear ambitions was decimated. More importantly, key figures within the regime, scientists, generals, and top Revolutionary Guard operatives, were killed. Among them were names previously considered untouchable, shielded by Iran's most secure defense layers. The loss of these individuals was not just a tactical blow. It was psychological. These were men who symbolized continuity and expertise within Iran's fragile military-intellectual ecosystem. Their elimination marked a rupture in the core of Iran's strategic command, triggering widespread panic within Tehran's leadership. According to regional analysts cited by Haaretz, this was the most surgically precise military operation executed by Israel in decades, with a success rate that signaled unmatched technological superiority. Iran, in turn, launched one of the largest missile offensives in its history. But despite its scale, the result was a tragic display of desperation rather than strength. Iran's missiles rained down in what appeared to be a show of force. Yet the outcome revealed how diminished its capabilities had become. Most of the missiles were intercepted midair by Israel's Iron Dome and other advanced air defense systems. A few struck empty zones or caused limited structural damage in the outskirts of Tel Aviv, resulting in 3 confirmed fatalities and dozens of injuries. The Iranian government, however, framed the strike as a triumph, broadcasting images of missile launches and nationalistic anthems across state-run television. But inside the upper circles of power, the reality was different. The failure to inflict significant military damage, combined with the ongoing internal unrest and a faltering economy, deepened the crisis at home. Ali Khamenei, the aging supreme leader, now stood atop a nation unraveling at multiple seams, its borders weakened, its economy collapsing, and its people increasingly vocal against the establishment's grip on power. Within Iran, the consequences of this open conflict were immediate and devastating. Entire divisions of its mid- to long-range air defense systems were destroyed or rendered inoperative. Analysts from the Institute for National Security Studies confirmed that several of Iran's S-300 systems and radar bases were neutralized in the span of a single night. This severely limited the regime's ability to respond to future air assaults. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological toll was heavier. Citizens across Tehran and major cities faced power outages, food shortages, and internet blackouts as the state moved to control the narrative. But fear was no longer an effective tool. The myth of invulnerability surrounding the Islamic Republic had been shattered. People gathered in underground networks and whispered openly in cafes, words once considered dangerous: revolution, collapse, freedom. The regime attempted to mask the damage through propaganda, but even its most loyal base began questioning whether Iran was still capable of defending its sovereignty. Simultaneously, Iran's regional influence began to deteriorate. Hezbollah in Lebanon, once its most powerful proxy, has suffered heavy losses due to Israeli precision strikes on arms depots and command centers. In Syria, Iranian forces embedded with pro-Assad militias are facing renewed offensives. In Iraq and Yemen, pro-Iranian factions are now isolated, weakened, and increasingly viewed as liabilities rather than assets. Iran's vision of a Shiite crescent stretching across the Middle East is collapsing under its own weight. The once feared ability to project power beyond its borders has dwindled into a desperate attempt to maintain symbolic relevance. Financial flows to proxy groups have been slashed. Supply chains are broken. The Revolutionary Guard, previously untouchable, now finds itself spread thin, overstretched, and demoralized. The symbolic war to liberate Jerusalem, once a rallying cry, is now drowned in the harsh reality of defeat after defeat. Iran no longer appears to be leading a coalition. It is barely holding on to what influence remains. The international response, too, has shifted. While the West remains cautious, there is a growing consensus that Iran is nearing a tipping point. The United States, under growing pressure from allies, reaffirmed its support for Israel's right to self-defense, but has avoided direct military involvement. China, seeking to maintain economic relations with both nations, released a neutral statement calling for de-escalation, but subtly acknowledged Iran's right to defend itself after being struck first. Russia, mired in its prolonged war with Ukraine, offered rhetorical support to Iran, but no tangible assistance. The Moscow Times even quoted unnamed Kremlin advisors, admitting that another open front is unsustainable. In South America, Brazil condemned Israel's offensive, but refrained from taking a definitive stance, reflecting its historically non-aligned posture. What's clear is that Iran is increasingly isolated diplomatically. The promises of support from its allies ring hollow as the regime's ability to retaliate crumbles, and its international standing deteriorates with each failed strike. Yet, even in the midst of ruin, Iran clings to a single hope: survival through narrative. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and his inner circle have turned to the only remaining weapon they trust: rhetoric. In fiery speeches, he portrays Iran as a moral victor, spiritually undefeated in the face of Zionist aggression. The missile barrage, although ineffective militarily, is cast as an act of resistance, a divine duty. The Iranian state media refers to the campaign as the Sword of Hussein, invoking deeply rooted martyrdom imagery from Shiite Islam. The objective is clear: to transform material defeat into ideological resilience. But even this strategy shows signs of fraying. The Iranian youth, who represent the majority of the population, are less influenced by religious dogma and more concerned with freedom, internet access, and economic opportunity. The spiritual armor that once protected the regime is beginning to rust, unable to shield it from the growing disconnect between the rulers and the ruled. In the biblical context, many now revisit Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. These prophecies speak of a northern coalition, including Persia, modern-day Iran, rising against Israel in a climactic battle of the end times. While interpretations vary, the alignment of modern geopolitical events with these ancient texts is striking. The book of Ezekiel describes a time when Israel is attacked by an alliance of nations, but prevails through divine intervention. It's no surprise, then, that some within Israel's government and military refer to current operations using scriptural language. One senior official, quoted anonymously by the Times of Israel, stated, "We are not just defending a nation, we are fulfilling destiny." For Iran, the danger is that this prophecy, once viewed as symbolic, is now being treated as strategic. And for the millions caught between the crossfire, civilians, refugees, children, these ancient texts offer no comfort, only the terrifying suggestion that the worst may still be ahead. Iran is now a nation standing on the edge of an abyss. The toll of its military entanglements, economic isolation, and internal repression has reached a point where survival feels more like a matter of delay than of strategy. What was once projected as regional resilience is now crumbling under the weight of accumulated failures. For decades, the Iranian regime has carefully balanced between ideological extremism and pragmatic governance. But that balance has shattered. The streets of Tehran, once filled with chants against foreign adversaries, now echo with the cries of the Iranian people themselves, demands for justice, bread, and freedom. The latest missile attacks may have momentarily rallied loyalists, but their effect has already faded. The Iranian public, exhausted and skeptical, no longer sees Israel as the only enemy. Increasingly, their own government is the source of their suffering. The economic crisis is perhaps the most visible symptom of this collapse. International sanctions, particularly those imposed by Western powers over the past decades, have paralyzed Iran's access to global markets. Oil exports have plummeted. The national currency, the rial, has lost most of its value, leading to hyperinflation that makes even basic necessities unaffordable. Reports from Al-Monitor describe entire regions where food staples like bread and rice are now rationed or unavailable. Youth unemployment has surpassed historic highs. Middle-class families have fallen into poverty. Thousands have fled the country in search of stability abroad, contributing to a brain drain that leaves Iran less capable of managing its internal crisis. As these economic realities deepen, so does the resentment. Public confidence in the government's ability to govern is disintegrating, and even conservative voices are beginning to question whether the regime has the capacity to recover from its current state. Meanwhile, the state's response to growing dissent has only added fuel to the fire. Over the past year, protests have erupted in dozens of cities, triggered by everything from water shortages to the rising cost of medicine. The regime's reaction has been brutally consistent: suppression. Armed forces, including the Basij and the Revolutionary Guard, have been deployed to crush demonstrations, often with lethal force. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International report widespread detentions, extrajudicial killings, and the use of torture against political prisoners. But repression has its limits. Each protest now returns with more intensity, more defiance. What was once fear has become fury. A new generation, more connected, more informed, and less religiously devout, has risen with a voice that refuses to be silenced. Their revolution is not grounded in ideology but in survival. Their enemy is not Israel but the corruption and cruelty within their own borders. This internal collapse is being watched carefully by the rest of the world. For Western powers, particularly the United States and Europe, a weakened Iran presents both an opportunity and a danger. On one hand, a disintegrating regime could mean the end of nuclear ambitions and regional aggression. On the other hand, a power vacuum in Iran could lead to chaos, civil war, or worse, a takeover by even more extreme factions. The comparison with Syria looms large. In the early stages of the Syrian civil war, the international community underestimated the consequences of regime instability. The result was a humanitarian catastrophe and the rise of violent extremist groups. Iran, with its vast population and strategic position, poses an even greater risk. Intelligence agencies across the West are reportedly on high alert, preparing for the possibility of mass refugee flows, loss of nuclear material security, or the rise of separatist insurgencies within Iran's ethnically diverse population. For Israel, the situation is equally delicate. The weakening of Iran may appear as a strategic victory, but it also carries deep uncertainty. A fractured Iranian state could become unpredictable, with rogue commanders or splinter militias seeking revenge through terrorist tactics. Moreover, the idea of total victory over Iran is an illusion. The ideology that fuels Iran's hatred for Israel is not confined to a government. It exists within networks, doctrines, and movements that transcend borders. Groups like Hezbollah, though weakened, still operate with dangerous autonomy. Militias in Iraq and Yemen still maintain caches of missiles and drones. Even if Iran's central command dissolves, the embers of its regional ambitions will remain scattered and volatile. As such, Israeli defense officials are increasingly focused not just on military preparedness, but on intelligence operations designed to detect and prevent non-state reprisals, including cyber warfare and coordinated terror plots. Within this growing atmosphere of instability, the only lifeline the Iranian regime sees is the construction of a narrative, one in which it remains the righteous victim of imperialist aggression. State television floods the airwaves with sermons, documentaries, and panel discussions painting the recent war as a spiritual battle. Ancient images of Karbala and the martyrdom of Hussein are invoked to stir emotional loyalty. According to IRNA News, public ceremonies are being organized nationwide, calling on citizens to stand firm as the guardians of Shiite resistance. But behind the cameras, these displays feel increasingly hollow. Attendance is sparse. Applause is forced. Faith, once a unifying force, is becoming a mask for a crumbling order. For those who view history through the lens of Scripture, Iran's current trajectory appears eerily aligned with ancient warnings. The prophet Isaiah speaks of a time when Elam, the historical region corresponding to modern southwestern Iran, would be shattered. See, I will break Elam's bow, the mainstay of their might. I will bring against Elam the four winds from the four quarters of heaven. Isaiah 21:2, 49:36. This verse has been interpreted by some scholars as a foretelling of both military defeat and national dispersion. When read in the context of recent events, the destruction of Iran's missile systems, the fracturing of its internal unity, and the increasing possibility of diaspora, it becomes a chilling echo, not as a mystical prediction, but as a lens through which believers interpret current chaos. The idea that Iran, once Persia, a nation of kings and empires, would fall not only by sword, but by its own internal winds of rebellion, aligns strikingly with this passage. And yet, the end has not come, at least not yet. The regime still clings to power. The Revolutionary Guard still holds weapons, and the specter of escalation still lingers over the region like a sword suspended by a fraying thread. The danger now is not only in what has happened but in what could come next. A cornered regime, desperate and humiliated, may act irrationally. It could unleash new waves of attacks, ignite conflict through its remaining proxies, or even risk a last attempt at nuclear breakout. History teaches us that empires do not fade quietly. They often fall with thunder. And when they do, they sometimes drag others with them. Whether Iran will follow that path remains to be seen, but one thing is certain. The ground is shaking beneath its feet, and the cracks are growing wider. In a sermon delivered just days ago, a prominent Israeli rabbi referenced the book of Daniel with trembling conviction. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, but he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Daniel 11:40, 12:1. The storm that now envelopes the Middle East is no longer limited to geopolitical maps or diplomatic forums. It has crossed the threshold into something far more complex, something ancient and prophetic for both the secular observer and the devout believer. The signs unfolding in real time evoke more than just military strategy or regional rivalry. They suggest a fulfillment of narratives long written in the sacred texts of history. As Iran continues to suffer military and political defeats and Israel fortifies its position with precision and resilience, voices around the world have begun turning to Scripture for understanding. In universities, synagogues, mosques, and even government halls, the discussions are no longer limited to economics or warfare. They now revolve around prophecy, destiny, and the final arc of human history. The question once whispered is now openly asked: are we approaching the biblical end of days? The renewed offensive launched by Israel, called the Rising Lion, was not just a military name. It was a direct allusion to Numbers 23:24. A passage describing Israel as a lion that will not rest until it has devoured its enemies. In the current context, this operation marked a turning point in tone and symbolism. The name was deliberate, carrying a spiritual weight and aligning modern Israel with its prophetic self-identity. As noted by theologian Dr. Michael L. Brown in his commentary on prophetic fulfillment in the 21st century, the choice of such language is not accidental. It reveals a nation increasingly aware of its role in a narrative much larger than global politics. Brown, 2023. The operation succeeded militarily, but struck deeper in meaning. It created the sensation that Israel is no longer simply defending itself. It is fulfilling something ancient, something inevitable. This shift from survival to fulfillment has dramatically reframed how even secular observers interpret the unfolding events. On the Iranian side, the situation grows darker by the hour. As the government's grip continues to weaken and internal resistance spreads, the question of regime survival becomes central. Yet rather than de-escalating, the remaining loyalists in Tehran seem to be doubling down on apocalyptic rhetoric. In a recent broadcast from IRIB, high-ranking clerics spoke openly of preparing the nation for the arrival of the Mahdi, the messianic figure in Shiite Islam, believed to return in a time of global chaos and war. The regime, cornered and desperate, now leans heavily into eschatological language, framing its suffering not as failure, but as martyrdom, a sacred prelude to divine intervention. This shift signals a final, perilous stage when faith is no longer a guide for survival, but a weapon in service of annihilation. The state's connection to reality erodes, and what remains is conviction, unyielding and potentially catastrophic. The danger here is profound: prophecy turned into policy and theology into military strategy. At the heart of this crisis lies a convergence of worldviews. Israel, forged through centuries of exile and prophecy, sees itself as a nation reborn against all odds, destined to stand as a signpost for divine justice. Iran, rooted in a revolutionary theology of martyrdom and resistance, believes it has been appointed to bring down unjust powers and restore purity to the world. These are not merely ideological positions. They are identities forged in blood, scripture, and survival. And when two nations believe they are the instruments of divine will, compromise becomes impossible. This is not just a regional clash. It is a collision of apocalyptic narratives. Each side believes history bends in their direction. Each side believes they are enacting the final chapter. That belief, more than any weapon, is what now fuels this escalating confrontation. Internationally, the world holds its breath. Though major powers remain officially uninvolved, their influence looms large behind every missile launched and every speech delivered. The United States urges restraint while providing intelligence and logistical support to Israel. China maneuvers diplomatically, offering to mediate while subtly aligning with Iran in opposition to Western dominance. Russia, caught in its own imperial entanglements, sees the conflict as both a distraction and an opportunity. The West fears a regional war could erupt into something global. Intelligence briefings in Europe warn of potential refugee waves, cyber attacks, and terror cells activating in response to an escalation. The war is no longer just Israel and Iran. It is a node in a global network of tensions, alliances, and ancient wounds. In this context, prophecy becomes less an abstract idea and more a script followed in real time, not by mystics, but by generals, diplomats, and ideologues with nuclear capabilities. Within Israel, despite its military advantage, there is no triumphalism. Citizens are wary. Reservists remain on high alert. The Iron Dome continues to intercept sporadic retaliatory strikes from surviving Iranian proxies, but the population knows that true peace is elusive. The sense of being surrounded, both literally and spiritually, persists. The memory of past exiles, genocides, and miracles shapes the national psyche. As Jerusalem buzzes with military strategy and religious fervor, another kind of reflection emerges, one that is quieter but perhaps more powerful. Synagogues are full. Psalms are read aloud on the radio. And in homes across the nation, families gather not only to pray for safety, but to interpret what all of this means. Are they witnessing divine judgment, a test, or the beginning of something far? That memory is now being tested again in real time. In Iran, the despair is heavier. The streets of Isfahan, Shiraz, and Tehran now echo with silence, broken only by the sound of distant sirens and funeral chants. The young are disillusioned. The old are weary. The regime continues to issue proclamations of spiritual victory, but even the loyal no longer believe the voice behind the curtain. Iranian exiles around the world speak of a homeland they barely recognize, one consumed by its own mythologies and blind to the suffering of its people. And yet, even now, hope flickers. Underground churches and resistance groups whisper of a different future, one not shaped by vengeance, but by healing. Still, these are fragile hopes in the shadow of overwhelming power. The regime may fall, or it may lash out one final time before doing so. But the damage, physical, moral, spiritual, is already vast. One cannot help but return to Scripture in such times. In Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, the prophet describes a moment when Israel, living in peace and without walls, is suddenly attacked by a great northern enemy, identified by many as Gog of the land of Magog. Included among the attacking nations is Persia, the ancient name for modern-day Iran. According to the text, God intervenes directly, destroying the enemy through divine judgment. Whether this is metaphor, prophecy, or coincidence remains debated. But for those who believe, the similarities are impossible to ignore. You will come from your place out of the far north, you and many peoples with you, like a cloud covering the land. It shall happen in the latter days that I will bring you against my land. Ezekiel 38 verses 15 to 16. These words, written thousands of years ago, now circulate in modern newspapers, political speeches, and late-night conversations across Israel and beyond. In the end, perhaps this conflict is more than the sum of its parts, more than a war for borders, oil, or pride. It may be the final unraveling of something that began centuries ago when Israel first scattered and returned, when empires rose and fell, when prophecy was written in trembling hands by men who believed they were recording the voice of eternity. Whether or not the end has come, one thing is certain. The world will not return to what it was. A threshold has been crossed. And as nations brace for what comes next, a final passage from Revelation resounds like a bell in the distance. Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn because of him.